Alright, let's finish up my homework for my psychology class. All I have to do now is this sex differences module. Hopefully, there's nothing weird or controversial in this module. Ayo, what the Well, I really wish I didn't have to make this video. My psychology of human sexuality class seemed really interesting, and I thought the professor was doing a good job of actually getting through to us. But then he assigns us a Ben Shapiro video with Jordan Peterson in it for homework, and it is not optional. What the fuck? In this installment of Twig's Change Project, I will go through the assigned video Why Men and Women Are Different, and explain exactly why I find this being assigned for a college class deeply disturbing. Before I begin, though, I would like to clarify that the purpose of this video is not to criticize my professor as a person, but rather to criticize the alt-right for their very misguided and often dangerous views on gender and sex. As an additional point of clarification, in the video that I will be breaking down, Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro use the terms gender and sex interchangeably. But when I use those terms, I'm referring to gender as someone's gender identity, like what pronouns they use and stuff. But when I say sex, I mean sex assigned at birth, i.e. male or female. Without further ado though, enjoy the video! In the intro of the video, Jordan Peterson establishes himself by saying that he is a psychologist with expertise in the field of gender differences.
One of my professional domains of expertise is individual differences. I'm a personality psychologist, and so I know the gender difference literature.
What he's talking about is differences in average scores for the big 5 traits, which are openness to experience, neuroticism, extroversion, assertiveness, and conscientiousness. Fair enough, I'll give that to him. He is a psychologist, and he's clearly a talented speaker. But what this introduction does is it establishes credibility to some of his unsubstantiated claims later on, if that makes any sense. At around 51 seconds, Peterson raises a question about the difference between sexes. He claims that there are differences in the sexes. Then he says you can predict someone's gender with 75% accuracy based on these differences.
Are there differences between the sexes? Turns out there are. All right, they're not massive, although if you sum them across all the traits, you can separate men and women with about 75% accuracy. So it's not trivial, but you have to sum across all the traits.
Following this rather shaky start, Peterson then raises a question about whether these differences between sexes are biological or if they are sociocultural. If you don't know what sociocultural means, it essentially is saying that where you grew up determines these differences.
Then another question comes up. Well, are those differences sociocultural or biological?
And then he hypothesizes that if the gender differences were sociocultural, that the data would show that in more egalitarian societies, that the differences in the personality test scores across the 5 different categories would be more minimal than in more traditionally gendered societies.
Then the hypothesis would be, if gender differences decrease among more egalitarian societies, then the gender differences are sociocultural, or at least more sociocultural.
The first real problem here emerges as he doesn't actually tell us what this study is. In fact, I had to go find it myself. It's a study from 2001 about sex differences across 26 cultures, and they included Asian, European, and North American cultures. Specifically, they did not include like Native Americans or other tribal cultures. And this study was paywalled, so I had to literally go into my university library account to go and access it. So a lot of regular people would not have access to this study. And to summarize this study for you, the abstract says that gender differences in the scores are more pronounced in the most egalitarian societies in the world, that women reported themselves to be higher in neuroticism, agreeableness, extroversion, and openness to ideas, whereas men were higher in assertiveness. Contrary to predictions from evolutionary theory, the magnitude of gender differences varied across cultures. What's interesting, though, is that on the surface, this study does appear to favor Jordan Peterson's position that there are differences between sexes. And I would agree somewhat. However, I do not think that this study is without flaws. The first major problem that I see is that this study only included cisgender, heterosexual men and women. So there's no accounting at all for the LGBTQ+ community. And the second problem that I see is that the most egalitarian societies that were surveyed were America and France, but even those societies aren't completely egalitarian. If I was doing this study, I would make sure to include groups like Native Americans and maybe some sub-Saharan African tribes that have very different views about gender identity than Western culture does, even if Western culture is more accepting of different genders and sexual orientations than, say, Asian countries. Just the fact that the study can only predict sex at a 75% accuracy rating using the personality test scores is enough to give me pause, and anyone else who knows that about 7 to 9% of adults worldwide identify as LGBTQ+. So even if we completely disregard the data and use very, very generous estimates, it's only 85% accurate. I know you might say that 15% might not sound like much, but there's almost 8 billion people in this world, and what that means is that 15% is over 1 billion people whose sex would be predicted incorrectly. What I think this study does do a good job of showing is that in cisgender heterosexual men and women, that there do appear to be measurable biological differences between their sexes. However, it's still flawed, and the fact that this study is so flawed means that it cannot in good faith be concluded that the conservative view of there only being 2 genders is correct. However, this is probably the best hard evidence that Jordan Peterson ever uses to back up his claims in this video. And mind you, he doesn't even tell you what study it is, but he follows making a claim at 2 minutes and 10 seconds that social sciences and the humanities have a left tilt. And he means political, obviously.
It's well known that the social sciences and the humanities have a left tilt.
And that since he is conservative, and that the leftists getting this data, and it allegedly supporting his view, gives him credibility.
It was these social scientists who generated the data that suggested that the gender differences not only were real, but that were bigger in egalitarian societies.
And while I do agree that while science does oppose a lot of alt-right values like anti-intellectualism, this is still not the best claim to be making without any evidence to back it up. And because he fails to back up his claim at all, is establishing a sort of trust me bro mindset with any of his subsequent claims that might be a little murkier just because this one sounds true and reasonable. And by the way, Peterson wastes no time doing this, because at around 3 minutes and 5 seconds, he claims that people in Scandinavia are being pushed outside of traditional gender roles by the education system.
And they're kind of pushing in this direction in Scandinavia. Boys and girls are different. Men and women are different. It looks biological. But because people are malleable, you could push the socio-cultural structure harder and harder to minimize the biological differences.
Providing no evidence whatsoever, and because of that, I had to do my own research again. And it turns out that in Sweden, there's an experiment going on in primary schools and preschools where teachers do not acknowledge gender stereotypes at all and use gender-neutral terms for everything. But this experiment is for the purpose of eliminating gender stereotypes in the younger generation, not forcing people to be gender-neutral. That is not what's going on here. So Jordan Peterson twists the truth into something that Shapiro's conservative audience would eat up and be radicalized against this dismantling of traditional gender roles. For the record, I think this is sick. I think that what Sweden is doing is a really cool idea. Let's hope it works out. So Jordan Peterson is just not educated enough on this topic, or maybe he is, but either way, he makes a claim that distorts the truth. And after this very controversial and ill-researched claim, Ben Shapiro then asks Jordan Peterson why the left claims to be the party of reason and science, but throws it away the moment that it becomes politically inconvenient for them.
And
Called Milo Yiannopoulos.
Exactly. So why is it that why do you think it is that so many folks on the left who purport to be all about reason and science and objective fact are so willing to throw those out the window the minute that it becomes politically inconvenient for them?
Well, Ben, what I would ask you is how come anytime you are put in an uncomfortable position intellectually during a debate, all you can do is do your signature talk really fast and circle around the topic but never actually address it or dodge the question entirely? Why can't you straight up defend your own points if you claim that your positions have objective moral truth? By doing this, Ben Shapiro is being just as much of a hypocrite as the radical left that he is attempting to criticize. However, his conservative audience will see this as a gotcha moment. And they'll see Shapiro and Jordan Peterson as like actually smart people who they can trust, which speaks to just how ignorant a lot of alt-right people can be. So ignorant, in fact, that they are completely unable to detect the true intent of Peterson's next move. Peterson gives his spiel about hierarchy of thoughts and beliefs and stuff like that, and he claims that conservatives allegedly have their facts higher up on their list of priorities than their beliefs.
Because you imagine that cognitive systems or an interpretation of the world has levels. They're axiomatic levels. Some fundamental presuppositions are more fundamental than others. And you could say, well, the leftists historically, maybe because of their atheistic rationality, are more on the side of science than, say, the fundamentalists of any sort. But when push comes to shove, you find out how the axioms are nested.
Okay. We're just not going to provide any evidence at all, I see. Because then he just moves on to making another claim that the left has fundamental axioms about group identity and that they have tribal values rooted in their ideology.
There's deeper axioms underneath that, which is that all hierarchies are based on power, and all power plays are based on group identity, tribal identity, essentially. And that the entire history of the world is nothing but a power play between these different identity groups. It's like, okay, well, if the science indicates that some of that's wrong, then do you alter those beliefs or do you alter the science? And the answer to that question is, well, it depends on how you've hierarchically arranged those. If the science is at the bottom, then you alter your beliefs, right? If the scientific facts are the axiomatic substructure, then you alter your beliefs. If your beliefs are the axiomatic substructure, then you alter the science.
At 5 minutes and 55 seconds, Peterson then says that at around 5 minutes and 55 seconds, Peterson then claims that he often tries to diagnose the axiomatic structure of the radical left. Again, why in the cinnamon toast fuck is this in a college curriculum? What are we doing? And then he claims that this is about warfare which leads to the benefit of the group, i.e. the left, which leads to tribalism, and that leads to war, and he doesn't like that because tribes fight.
And one of the things I've tried to do, so to speak, is to diagnose the axiomatic structure. It's like, okay, what's the metaphysical presumption structure of the radical left? Well, what it is you're basically your group. Your groups are basically engaged in warfare, right? And the warfare is arbitrary, except insofar as it serves your group. Okay, I don't buy any of that. I think that's a route to certain disaster. I think it's a degeneration into tribalism, not only because it returns us to tribalism and tribes fight, as the anthropological evidence for that is overwhelming, right? Tribes fight.
Essentially, what he's doing here is talking nonsense and using big words to try to sound smart. If you aren't super familiar with Jordan Peterson, he does this kind of thing all the goddamn time, using complicated terminology and retreating to semantics when he is challenged. Of course, since Peterson has an affinity for semantics, he then talks about how the culture war is about how the individual relates to the group, and how for the left, it is all about the group and it's all about power.
And so I think the culture war is about what's the proper framework within which to view human identity, and what's the relationship between the individual and the group in relationship to that identity. And the leftist answer is, it's all group and it's all power. It's like, okay.
And if this doesn't make any sense to you at all, I don't blame you, because it isn't supposed to make sense. It's supposed to make Peterson sound like a smart guy. And Shapiro's conservative audience will eat this up, like I said before. The message that they'll get is rah, 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 leftist bad, liberals bad, there are only two genders. And if that wasn't enough politics, Ben Shapiro then does his signature outro by claiming this. I'm just gonna let him say it.
Did you know that every like on this video creates one additional glorious leftist tier? Don't ask me why. That's called science.
Okay, I know that was a lot, but let me remind you that this video was assigned as homework in a college class by a certified professor. I will not disclose their name or my university to protect their identity, as well as protect my grade in the class, but I will freely speak my mind when I say that having your students watch this kind of content is exactly the kind of gateway drug that they need to go down the alt-right pipeline. It is well documented that Ben Shapiro and Jordan Peterson support Trump. They are homophobic, they are transphobic, and they are misogynistic as well. So these kind of views being endorsed in a college class is absurd. And all these views do is hurt people who are just trying to live their lives. I think that my professor needs to seriously reconsider whether this video is appropriate for a college classroom, and that he needs to apologize to his students for projecting his own political beliefs into a class that is not supposed to be political in any sense. I understand that psychology and everything to some extent is inherently political, but I'm sure you could have found some more neutral creator to explain sex differences between cisgender men and cisgender women. My problem isn't necessarily that my professor holds these beliefs, although that is kind of fishy, but it's that he is projecting them onto the class by assigning this as homework. I myself intend to confront him in the coming weeks after class and tell him that endorsing this kind of content is not okay, because I feel like any hateful views like these should not be in a college class. But I guess what you might not understand is even if like some kind of like super leftist content creator was endorsed in class and said that like all MAGA people are evil, I would also have a problem with that. The fact that politics are being shoved down our throats as students is just not appropriate to me, and especially I have a problem with the alt-right, but that isn't the main issue here. I hope you enjoyed my rambling / exposing my college professors / exposing how dumb Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro are. So if you did enjoy that, I would consider you to hit that like button and consider subscribing, because it tells me that you enjoy watching me expose my college professors. I mean, criticize the views of the alt-right. Anyways, that's all I got for y'all. I hope everyone has a great day. Peace.